Hi, everybody. Oh my goodness. Have you ever swallowed something and it went down the wrong way? I had that happen a little while ago, so I might be coughing a little more today than usual. So, today we have a story for you. This story is from the Grimm's Brothers, so it's from Europe, and it is called Snow White and Rose Red. Once upon a time, very long ago, there was a lady. And this lady had two daughters that she loved very, very much. Snow White had blonde hair, and she was very beautiful. And she was a very quiet, gentle sort of person. She liked to help around the house and do small things like cooking and cleaning and knitting and work in the garden and things like that. Rose Red was also very beautiful, but she had dark hair. And she was very lively and energetic. She liked to help around the house and stuff too, but she liked to be outside, dancing or singing or walking through the forest or working in the garden, things like that. Well, even though these two sisters were very, very different, they loved each other very, very much, and they were each other's best friends. They loved to do things together. One day in the summer, they would go out and they would walk through the woods and they'd go down to the river and feed the ducks, or they would sing to each other, and sometimes they would sing with the birds. But in the winter, they really couldn't go out of the house because, you see, they lived in a forest and it was very hard for them to go through all of the snowdrifts outside. So in the winters, they would do a lot of things in the house, and they would take care of the animals they had outside. And in the evenings, when it would get dark, they would all gather around the fireplace and they would bring out the big book of stories and legends that they loved to read. And they would all sit down around the fire, and Mother would put the book on her lap and she would read them the stories. Well, one night, as they were sitting there in the winter, there came a knocking on the door, kind of a pounding. And so Snow White went to see who was at the door. And when she opened the door, expecting to see a person, what she saw was a big black bear. And the bear said, "Please, it's very cold outside. Could I please come in and warm myself by your fire?" Well, Snow White screamed, and she tried to close the door. But her mother said, Snow White, honey, let the bear inside. He's obviously very gentle, and it's not a good night outside for any living thing to be out there. There's a snowstorm, and the wind was blowing, and, well, you know what that's like. So, Snow White opened the door very carefully, and the bear came inside, and he stood right inside the door, just stood there. And Snow White said, and Snow White closed the door, and the bear said, "I don't want to be a bother, but could one of you maybe brush the snow off my back? It's rather cold and wet." And, well, Snow White was feeling a little bit sheepish and sorry for having screamed, because the bear was clearly very nice. So she got a broom and she brushed all of the snow off of his back. Well, the bear came over and he sat down near the fireplace, and they didn't read any more stories that night because they were talking to the bear and getting to know the bear. And he let the girls pet him and kind of pull on his fur and feel what his fur was like and pretend to push him over, and he would roll over and they would scratch his belly. And, well, Mother, when it came time to go to bed that night, Mother said, "Mr. Bear, if you would like, you can stay here tonight. It's quite warmer than it would be outside." And he said, "Well, thank you very much." And so he curled up in front of the fireplace and he went to sleep. Well, the next morning, when Rose Red came running into the room, the bear wasn't there. He had let himself out. But that night, there came a knocking on the door, and the bear came back. And he came back every night for the entire winter, and they came to look forward to his visits. And they really enjoyed talking to him, and he enjoyed listening to the stories, and they were having a wonderful time together. Well, when the spring came and the birds came back and started to sing with the girls again, the bear said, "Unfortunately, sadly, I have to leave." And they said, "Oh no, please don't leave us. We will miss you so much." He said, "Well, you see, I have a treasure and it's deep in the forest and it's buried underground. And in the winter, the ground is frozen. So the evil dwarf who's trying to steal it from me, he can't get to it. But now the ground has gotten soft again and he could dig it up, and I need to go protect my treasure." Oh, well, the girls cried a little, as you always do when you have to leave someone that you love, and they were sad, but they understood, so they gave him hugs and he left and went into the woods. And as the year went by, the girls greeted their bunny friends again, and they got to feed the ducks again, and they sang with the birds, and they helped their mother in the garden and around the house, and they were having a good year so far. Well, one day, when the girls were feeling a little sad because they were missing their friend the bear, their mother said, "Girls, we need more firewood. Could you go out in the forest and pick up more firewood?" "Well, yes, Mother, of course we can." They loved to help their mother, so they went out to get the firewood. And as they were walking down the path, all of a sudden, Rose Red stopped her sister. She said, "Snow White, look at that." There was on the path in front of them, there was a tree branch that had fallen out of a tree. And right in front of that tree branch was a little man. And he had a little green coat on, little brown pants, and he was hopping up and down, and his face was very red. And he was yowling and screaming and yelling, "Help me, help me, help me." Well, when the girls got a little closer, they saw that his beard had gotten stuck in that tree branch. And he was pulling and pulling and pulling and trying to get it free, and he couldn't get it out. Well, they like to help people, so they ran up and they said, "We'll help you." And they took a hold of his jacket, and they pulled and they pulled and they pulled and they pulled and they pulled, and they could not get his beard out of that tree branch. It was so stuck. Well, Snow White liked to sew, and it just so happens that she had a little pair of scissors in her pocket of her apron. And so she reached into her pocket and she pulled out the scissors, and snip, 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 she just cut off the very tip of that dwarf's beard. Well, you would think that the dwarf would have been grateful, would say thank you, wouldn't you? Not this dwarf. He got even redder in the face, if it's possible, and he started jumping up and down. "You terrible, evil girls! How dare you? You've ruined my beautiful beard!" The girls were so surprised they could just look at him. That's all they could do. And he stomped over by the tree, and he picked up a bag that was laying there, and it made a lot of clinking sounds. And as he slung it on his back, one gold coin just sort of fell out of the bag, and he walked away into the forest. Well, the girls were so surprised they didn't know what to do. But they still had firewood to gather for their mother, so they gathered more firewood while they talked about the odd little dwarf that was so not thankful. And then they went back home. Well, a couple of days later, they decided to go down to the river and feed the ducks. So they got some corn together, and they went down to the river to feed the ducks. When they get down to the river, who should they see but that little tiny man? This time he was wearing a red coat and brown pants, but again he was yelling and screaming for help because his beard was all tangled up in a fishing line. And there was a fish on the other end of the fishing line, and it was pulling and pulling, trying to get loose. And that little man was about to be pulled into the river. Well, Snow White and Rose Red, they didn't really want to help him because he had been so rude and so unkind the last time. But if they didn't help him, he was going to go into the river and at least get soaking wet and probably get drowned. And so they wanted to save him. And so they ran over and they grabbed a hold of his coat and they pulled and they pulled and they pulled. But, the fish on the other end of the line, it was pulling too. And Rose Red said, Snow White, you know what you're going to have to do. And Snow White said, I know, I just don't want to do it. But she pulled her scissors out of her apron pocket and snip, snip, she cut off the end of the dwarf's beard. Oh my goodness, they thought he had yelled the last time. Now he was jumping up and down and stamping his feet. You've ruined my beard, you evil, cruel little girls. You're so stupid. Why would you do that? And he walked over to a rock near the river, and he picked up a bag and he slung it on his shoulder. And as he picked up that bag, several beautiful pearls fell out of the bag. And he slung it on his shoulder and he walked away. Well, the girls were so surprised by that. He was such an ungrateful little man. Well, Snow White and Rose Red talked about that ungrateful little man the whole time they were feeding their friends the ducks, and while they walked back home, and the next day they were still talking about him. They had decided they probably wouldn't tell their mother about him, not because they wanted to keep a secret, but just because he really wasn't that important. He was just very odd. Well, the next morning their mother came in and she said, Girls, I'm trying to sew something, but I've run out of thread. Could you go to the village and get me some more thread? Well, yes, of course, Mother. We'd love to do things to help you. And hey, we get to go outside and walk through the forest to the village. That would be fun. And so they did. They walked through the forest, and as they were going through the forest, one of them looked up and saw an eagle soaring up above them through the sky. So they kind of kept an eye on that eagle because they had a lot of rabbit friends and bird friends, and they just wanted to make sure that that eagle wasn't going to kill someone that was their friend. And then they saw the eagle swoop down towards the earth. Oh dear, it's found something. I know it has to eat, but, well, hopefully it's not one of our rabbit friends. And as they were hurrying through the woods towards the village, they came upon a clearing. And as they got to the clearing, they heard somebody yelling for help. And so they ran to help. And what do you think they found? Yup, it was that little man again. This time he was wearing a blue coat and brown pants. And the eagle had caught him. And it was trying to pull him off the ground. But he had a couple of sacks in his hands, and he was holding on to them very tightly, and they were holding him down a little bit. And just as the girls got into the clearing, the eagle started to kind of lift the little man off the ground. And they ran over, and they grabbed hold of him, and they pulled, and they pulled, and they pulled, and they tugged, and they pulled. And eventually the eagle got tired of pulling, and it let go. And it flew away. Well, you would think the little man would be grateful to the girls for saving him from the eagle, but of course he was not. He got angry again, and he yelled at how they would torn his coat, and his head hurt from being yanked on so much, and how could they do that? They were horrid girls. And he walked away with a couple of sacks that he threw over his shoulder again. Well, the girls went on to the village, still talking about that ungrateful little man. And when they got to the village, they bought the thread for their mother, and they started to walk home. But on their way home, suddenly Rose Red said, Snow White, wait, look. And ahead of them, they could see that little man. He was sitting on a rock, a big flat rock. And he took one of those bags that they had seen him carrying earlier that day, and he poured it out on the rock. And it was full of jewels, and they glittered and sparkled and shone in the sunlight. Well, it was such a beautiful sight that the girls couldn't help themselves. They gasped. And the little man heard them, and he turned around and looked at them, and he got so angry. He said, You're thieves, spies. Why would you stare at me? Don't look over here. This is mine. You can't have it. Well, Rose Red had had enough of this ungrateful man, so she walked over to him and she said, You know what? We are not thieves. We are not spies. We were coming back from the village, and you're right next to the path. And besides, we've saved your life 3 times, and you've never thanked us once. You know, you could just say thank you once in a while. that little dwarf had clearly never been spoken to that way. He got so angry, he couldn't even talk. He just kind of, and his face turned red, and he stomped his feet. He was so angry that he wasn't paying attention to what was going on around him. And a bear came out of the woods and slapped with a paw and stuck him up against a tree. Well, the girls were rather frightened by that, as you can imagine. A bear just walked out of the woods. I would scream. Would you scream? I would scream. And they grabbed each other and they screamed. And they weren't quite sure what to do. And then all of a sudden the bear, the dwarf, pinned up the tree. He said, "My friends, don't you recognize me?" And they realized it was their bear friend from the winter. "Oh, it's so good to see you." They were so happy to see their friend. But he still had that dwarf pinned up against the tree. And he said, "Hold on a second." And he dropped the dwarf on the ground and squished him with his paw, dead. And instantly, the bear was gone. And there was standing a handsome young man dressed all in a suit of gold. And he said, "I'm not actually a bear. I'm a prince. That evil dwarf turned me into a bear so that he could steal my treasure. But now that he's dead, I've been turned back into myself. And I have to go back to my father's palace now." And Snow White said, "Oh, please, wouldn't you come back to the cottage with us first? Mother would love to see you." And he said, "I would like that. I would like to talk to your mother about something very important." And so they went back to the cottage. And it turned out that something very important was that the bear prince had fallen in love with Snow White, and he wanted to marry her. And he asked Mother, and Mother said yes. And he asked Snow White, and Snow White said yes. And they all went back together to the palace. And Rose Red and Snow White both lived at the palace, and so did Mother. And Snow White and the prince got married, and you know what? The prince had a cousin who was a very good match for Rose Red, and they got married. And Mother lived at the palace with them, and they were so very happy. And if they haven't died, they're living still. And that's the story of Snow White and Rose Red. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come back and join us again on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time here on the Milledgeville Public Library IL Facebook page. I'm going to tell another story. How about we hear a story from Africa called How the Ostrich Got His Long Neck? So we'll see you on Wednesday to find out how the ostrich got his long neck. Thank you. Bye.